Okay, we are now recording, and folks are asking about this week's essay. By the way, those of you who are watching the recordings, welcome, welcome, and welcome to those of you who are here live and in person, um, or virtually, at least at the same time. You know what I mean. But anyway, on the essay this week, since it's about ethics, and ethics didn't matter until the 20th century, uh, and it started largely here in Chattanooga, or with Adolph Ox of Chattanooga. Anyway, find something in the current situation. I figured, given the fact that we're having elections right now, find something you find ethical and something you find unethical, and tell me why it is or it isn't ethical, and not just because you have an opinion, but based on code of ethics, which I gave you, but also, and several of you have done it, other things that you may have found. I've seen a couple of drafts already, and like I said, I'll accept them until about 4-ish on Friday. And then, you can go back and do them on your own. The thing is, what the one kind of flaw or things that somebody could do better in the ones I've seen so far is you'll say the coverage was unethical, you'll say it was unfair, and then you'll quote the code of ethics that says unfairness is not ethical, but you don't give me the details of what the real issue is. The New York Times always makes Republicans look bad. And there's some research that shows that they often do. Back it up. Say, oh, the coverage is unfair to the president, and then say, in this article, they said blah, 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 blah. So you're not using specific examples of what the issues are. So that's the one kind of thing I'm seeing people miss. Other questions on the assignment while I got you here?
For articles to use, do we just pull random one? Do we just search up election articles and use those?
That's okay, but I would like you to find something that you've really seen and gone, aha, that's really something I should look into. If you want to, you could do that. You just say, oh, primary elections or Trump or Biden, and get some articles and find good or bad. I would like you to base them more on something that you care about. I guess that's, hey, if you come up with something, that's fine. Come up with something partisan. You could compare Huffington Post to Breitbart, or MSNBC to Fox, whatever. So yeah, do something, Nigel, that I would hope that that bugs you one way or another. One of our folks said, hey, racial coverage. What's good, or what do we do right about racial coverage? What do we do wrong?
Okay.
Yeah, so those sorts of things. Other stuff. And again, base it on the real code of ethics, not just your own perspectives, your own biases. We all have them. Just because you don't like something. Again, someone asked about violence and said, well, the coverage was kind of violent. And my response was, yes, but was it an accurate depiction of that violence? Or do those riots make people look worse than they really are? Does it make the police look worse than they really are? Those are the kind of things. It's not just violence per se, but is the violence ethical or not? So take that next step. So think about stuff you see. I hope that helps. Again, at least 300 words. And I hate that you're going to sit and count words. Minimum 300, no maximum. At least one outside source. And I gave you the code of ethics, but more is always good. And there will be no more tests. And I'll probably come up with one more essay before we're done.
Woohoo.
Woohoo. Again, this is just a crappy semester for all of us. So I'm not going to make it any more worse than it needs to be. Okay. Meanwhile, back at the class, we will do screen sharing. See, it's taken me the whole semester to get used to navigating this stuff too. Anyway, history of broadcasting. You know, that's like the first thing that happened, you know, late 19th, early 20th century, really the first new medium. Everything's been print to this point. Even if we had photography, even though we had the telegraph, I guess the telegraph is a new medium, but this is the first big new mass medium. And since in the 20th century, we have images, we have moving stuff. Here is how it worked. This is a great little documentary. Ken Burns, who did the Civil War and baseball and jazz. It's about the birth of broadcasting and radio. So imagine yourself sitting in the dark, because that's the way the world was at the turn of the 19th and 20th century. And then you start hearing the voices.
Ladies and gentlemen, here is the latest bulletin from the Intercontinental Radio News. And we'll have our commentator give you a word picture of the scene as soon as he can reach there from Princeton.
Listen at 6 o'clock tonight over the station WEAF, NBC in New York. This is coming all the way to LO. Doctor. My land, my farmland, my big thing.
Out of the fog, out of the night, and into his American adventures comes Bulldog Drummond.
Sound itself attracts. Ask any eavesdropper. Sound is the first stirring of the infant. He hears sounds, he puts them together, and they cohere. Sounds have a romance. The sound of a cricket at night to establish mood in a radio drama. Very simple effect. The sound of thunder, the sound of rain. There is no sound on the moon because it takes air to support it. The vibrations of air create the sound. And radio was a medium which employed that magic.
Come on, men. We're gaining on them. They've seen us, Tom. Right, fellas.
Tell me, Mr. Moody, what are your feelings about the radio?
I don't hold with it, Bob.
Displeases you?
I don't hold with furniture that talks.
There's a great sensational wonder today, we know. Everyone is talking and fooling with radio. It's a wireless telephone. I just got one of my own. Now I sit at home alone and hear them dish the dirt. But all that I can hear is
radio made America a land of listeners.
sound like wildcat hisses, but it's boys and misses making silly wishes.
It entertained and educated, angered and delighted Americans of every kind and age and class.
Buzzing in my ear is traveling men and females, lonesome wives and females, soon by ducks and dashes, making wireless matches.
It taught them new ways to dance and talk and think.
Filled with love tales by the score, and maybe
It brought the
more.
world into their living rooms and sold them things they hadn't known they wanted.
Station LOVE signing off. Good night.
An Italian-born inventor, Guglielmo Marconi, is remembered as the father of radio. But three very different Americans, with stories as improbable as any radio drama, were most responsible for its astonishing success. Lee DeForest, a poor clergyman's flamboyant son who liked to call himself the father of radio. Although his enemies said most of his discoveries had already been discovered by others. Edwin Howard Armstrong, a brilliant, withdrawn inventor with a fondness for fast cars and a passion for great heights, who wanted his inventions to enrich people's lives, but who would spend a lifetime defending his work against the false claims of others. And David Sarnoff, the hard-driving immigrant from Russia, who saw infinite possibilities in a hobbyist toy, created the most powerful communications company on Earth, and let nothing and no one stand in his way.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special news bulletin. The Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii by air. President Roosevelt has just announced.
The world these three men helped to make was altogether new. But they were driven to create it by ancient qualities. Idealism and imagination, greed and envy, ambition and determination, and genius. Only one would succeed on his own terms.
Let me assert.
And that's why I like to show this particular film, and I'll push through some of the slower bits. But the point is, it's not invented by one person, really. I guess Marconi, but you saw Marconi used it as a telegraph. It was invented to be the wireless telegraph. He sent Morse code. It was other people who decided, hey, we could use this same technology in different ways to broadcast voices. And of these three inventors, like I said, only one became a real success. And that one was the one that didn't invent anything. He just had some ideas, but he was not a technology person.
I firmly believe that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Crossing Brooklyn Bridge that morning in the rain, I saw a man leaning against the cables. He seemed to be waiting for a lift. There were spots of fresh rain on his shoulders.
Ladies and gentlemen, the story you are about to hear is true. The names have been changed to protect the innocent.
Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? The shadow knows.
your life.
Okay, we'll zip through this quickly. Inventor of the radio tube, Lee DeForest. Okay.
Lee DeForest is a wonderful character, a churl, a roue, a cad, a thief, a romantic, and yet probably the man most responsible for bringing radio broadcasting to the American public.
Yeah, he was a huckster, and his parents worked at the Tuskegee Institute. He went to Yale. He wanted to be an engineer. And yeah, he was pretty ugly dude. Anyway, but he heard about Marconi and said, aha,
but he was not daunted. He would one day hold more than 300 patents. He was voted both the nerviest and the homeliest member of his class, and received just one vote as most likely to succeed, his own. He professed not to care. Radio waves had been discovered in 1887, and they had come to obsess him because they held the promise of sending messages through the air without wires.
What is that? I don't know. Oh.
In 1896, Guglielmo Marconi sent a wireless dot and dash signal 9 miles across Salisbury Plain in England. It would spark a revolution. 3 years later, his Marconi Wireless Company had spread to America, where he made a fortune outfitting ships and shore stations with wireless equipment and men trained to send and receive Marconigrams. Lee DeForest wrote to Marconi asking for a job. The famous man did not even bother to respond. DeForest determined to outdo him. I want millions of dollars, he said. I want to excel. In 1900, DeForest patented a device that improved reception of weak signals, then challenged Marconi to see who could best provide up-to-the-minute coverage of the international yacht races off New York. The test proved nothing. The rivals' transmitters jammed each other, and
they were on the same frequency, so no one got anything. So the government had to later get into the act to allocate the different stations. But anyway, all right, he's setting up all these different stations, and most of them didn't work.
See demonstrations in glass-walled stations showing people how fabulous wireless was, sell stock certificates, and then head for the hills before the station was finished.
Yep. So he was, yeah, he wasn't all that good. And then, yes, he sent telegrams to his girlfriend, and it didn't work out. That didn't work out well either. Again, half of his inventions came from someone else. This is Ernest Fessenden, a Canadian person who also invented the radio tube at the same time. So yes, he was a character. But
he said that he knew there were sound waves out there and he wanted to direct them to.
Okay, this is the next guy.
Patent.
were wooed and won.
Okay.
Meanwhile, the world was beginning to learn that DeForest had based his great success on someone else's invention. Back in 1903, he had visited the laboratory of the Canadian.
Okay, it was somebody else's idea.
A glass device resembling a light bulb.
Okay, but he still invented the tube.
I have had one aim in view, to make my name at least rank with that of Marconi. It did, for a while. Armed with his new device, he now resolved to carve out for himself what he called an invisible empire of the air, sending out music and the human voice.
See, it wasn't so much that he invented anything technical. It was DeForest's idea to use that technology in a different way. Rather than just send Morse code, he said, hey, let's use this same technology to broadcast, to send messages not point to point like Marconi did, but across many people, and to send not just dots and dashes, but voices. Again, not a new technology, but using new technology in different ways.
To eager listeners.
That's the idea. And there he is, and there's the first voice. He sent the first voice recording over the air. There was his second wife. She found he was a fraud too.
Comfortable as
Okay.
DeForest.
Okay.
Is some of his major fight.
Okay, here's the second person in the documentary.
Birth of their daughter, Harriet, in 1909. The DeForests were divorced.
Mm-hmm.
Not long afterwards, DeForest's new company collapsed amid charges of stock fraud.
Of course.
At his trial, 100 witnesses testified.
Yeah, he was a crook.
The trial went through.
But, okay, the next guy was the only honest
some of
person.
his major fights with
Howard Armstrong.
Edwin Howard Armstrong.
It makes me very sad that his name isn't better known. I remember as a child talking about him and saying, my uncle invented radio. And people, I couldn't put it any better than that. I didn't really know quite what he had invented, but nobody'd ever heard. They say, who is your uncle? I say, Edwin Howard Armstrong. Who? And even today, people say Edwin Howard Armstrong. Who?
I believe that when history is written.
What Armstrong did is he made radio practical. It wasn't very good with DeForest. You couldn't hear it well. Armstrong made it work well, made it available to be a mass medium, and his greatest invention was FM. He's the guy who invented FM radio, which sounds good.
Howard Armstrong should be remembered as.
Okay. Everyone thought he was a thing. And
Through the air, beep, 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 beep.
He was an honest person, hardworking, needless to say,
He reached this country when he was 9 years.
Okay, so he was a great inventor that no one ever heard of.
Perfectly suited for voice and music, as well as code.
Yeah, FM.
All of a sudden, everybody could hear these signals very, very much more easily and at much greater distances. And of course, that brought the explosion of broadcasting.
There you go.
On the last night of January 1914, in a wireless shack near Belmar, New Jersey, Armstrong demonstrated his receiver for the chief inspector of the Marconi Wireless Company. Signals from Ireland and Hawaii, San Francisco, and Nova Scotia all came through loud and clear. The chief inspector pronounced it the most remarkable receiving system in existence and recommended that the young inventor's discovery be licensed to his company. The inspector's name was David Sarnoff.
Telegraphy showed the general the way, took infant radio and taught it to pay. And he began.
Yes, he had Frank Sinatra at his birthday, is the featured singer at his birthday party. David Sarnoff did not invent anything, not anything physical. He invented the broadcast network. He invented NBC. Here's his funeral.
And saw a gadget.
At his funeral, his eulogy was given by then Vice President Nelson Rockefeller.
David Sarnoff looked at radio.
So he was a thing.
Could begin to approach his life.
Station EA2, Madrid.
Unlike DeForest and Armstrong, he was not an inventor. He was more than any man of his time, a corporate executive who understood the meaning and the impact of science upon the future of the country. No one has ever started from a lower plane of life and gone further, in my judgment, than Sarnoff did. He reached this country when he was 9 years old, an immigrant boy who didn't speak a word of English. Within 30 years, he was president of one of the most powerful companies in America, RCA.
David Sarnoff was born in a shtetl in the Russian province of Minsk, the son of a Jewish house painter. His family hoped the boy would become a rabbi, but he had other ideas. And when his family arrived in New York in 1900, he went to work at 9, peddling Yiddish newspapers, while struggling to master English from papers pulled from trash cans.
It was poverty as intense as any Dickens portrayed in the worst days in London. He would be waking up by the sound of the elevated train coming down. And as he heard the distant rumble, he'd jump out of bed, throw on his shoes and his pants and run downstairs, and the bundles would be thrown from the L without stopping. And he'd pick up his bundles and race out to be the first newsboy to get them to the newsstands.
By the age of 14, he had bought his own newsstand and put his younger brothers and even his father to work. Hoping he settled for a job delivering telegrams, then became an office boy at the American Marconi Company, where he ignored frequent taunts of Jew boy, read every letter he was asked to file, and practiced sending and receiving telegraph messages in his spare time until he was said to have one of the best fists in the business.
They used to play tricks on him. Like, for instance, some lumber would arrive, and they would say, "Oh, yes, Davy Sarnoff takes care of that," you know, and so they would refer all sorts of things to him. Well, he always took care of them. But so he was a figure of ridicule at first, but he took himself seriously and gradually got other people to take him seriously.
When Marconi himself visited the office, the 16-year-old Sarnoff made a point of introducing himself as the firm's newest employee. "We were on the same wavelength," he said later. Soon he became Marconi's personal messenger, given the delicate task of delivering flowers to the inventor's many mistresses scattered about the city. On Sunday, April 14, 1912, the British liner Titanic struck an iceberg in the North Atlantic. Her distress signals were heard by a Marconi operator aboard a nearby ship, allowing those passengers who made it to the lifeboats to be rescued. Marconi and his invention were widely praised in the days that followed, and federal law soon required that all large ocean-going vessels be equipped with wireless. Sarnoff has stated his key during the crisis, passing on details of the tragedy as they rattled in to waiting relatives. To enhance his own myth, he would later falsely claim to have been the only operator at work during those anxious hours. Newspapers hailed him as the boy wonder of radio. "The Titanic disaster brought radio to the front," he wrote later, "and incidentally, me." David Sarnoff would fight to stay up front for the rest of his life.
When he was a very young man working for the Marconi Company, Sarnoff saw wireless communications as Marconi had seen it. Communication from one point or one person to another point or another person. What Sarnoff evolved was the idea of taking communications from one point and transmitting it to many points. In other words, from point to mast. And
Yeah, DeForest thought about that separately and earlier. The difference was that Sarnoff had the Marconi Company and then RCA, the Radio Corporation of America. He made the radios and then he gave you NBC to put shows on the radio.
was the origin of radio, of mass broadcasting.
Yep, he's the one who, even though DeForest had the idea earlier, Sarnoff is the one who made it happen.
Of one person talking to millions. He foresaw that clearly.
At just 21, he was given a new office in the Woolworth building overlooking all of Manhattan and put in charge of procuring new technology for the firm. I have in mind a plan of development, he wrote his boss in 1916, which would make radio a household utility in the same sense as the piano or the phonograph. Thanks to the work of DeForest and Armstrong, Sarnoff believed it was now entirely feasible to bring music into American homes.
Yeah, the other guys made the technology. He had the vision to say, let's put this everywhere and make it a mass media.
The receiver can be designed in the form of a simple radio music box, the memo continued. Amplifying tubes and a loud-speaking telephone would eliminate the need for headphones. The whole thing could be made to sell for $75, Sarnoff promised. And 100,000 radio music boxes could be sold in a single year. Sarnoff's boss did not even bother to respond, but he was not discouraged.
Here we go on another adventure with Jack Armstrong, the All-American Boy.
When I was a kid, somebody on the block said, have you heard there's a thing called radio? And you hear things through the air? And I said, I listened to this with incredulity. How could that be? And he said, Harold Merchant down the block has a crystal set. Come.
Boy, did you see what I saw? A huge African lion jumped into the truck where Jack Armstrong, Vic, and Billy are sleeping.
And there was a Quaker Oats box with coils of wire around it. And it was wired up to a little galena. And this galena was Aladdin's lamp. You rubbed it or you filled it with a cat's whisker, and in came the world.
Believe you me, I want to know how Jack and his friends get out of this one. You do too.
And I remember tuning in. I lived in Boston. Tuning in, my God, Schenectady, New York. What a thrill that was.
WEAF, New York. David Sarnoff was ahead of his time, but barely. Lee DeForest was already transmitting music and news bulletins every evening from his New York studio. And the news of Howard Armstrong's regenerative receiver had enraged him. Armstrong was fresh out of college and 14 years DeForest Jr., yet claimed to understand his discovery better than DeForest himself did. And he had accomplished more with it in 2 years than DeForest had in 8. To add to his embarrassment, DeForest tried twice to obtain a...
So these guys are fighting over the technology and having these patent fights. And then Armstrong serves in the war, World War I. And so they're all going to court fighting over all of this stuff.
David Sarnoff immediately saw the commercial potential of his young friend's discovery. Armstrong superheterodyne radio sets would be RCA's biggest success.
He sees that Armstrong could make radio work. He buys the patent and he starts making the radios, the RCA Corporation, the Radio Corporation of America. People didn't know they wanted a radio until they saw one. Not unlike the iPhone or the iPad. Did anyone know they wanted one of these before you ever heard of it? No. Sarnoff did the same thing 100 years earlier.
And would propel the company to preeminence in the new field of electronics. For his remarkable invention, Armstrong was promoted to major.
Okay, and he made things work well. These guys keep fighting each other in court while
Secretary Marion McInnes.
While Sarnoff is making RCA. Yes, that's Armstrong on top of the building. He likes to climb radio towers.
You won't have to send her word by wire. You never fire lover by radio, even when you're all alone.
Gradually, inventors and amateurs were creating a new industry.
Yep, a new industry, new stuff. Okay, here's the
Changed
thing
the
I want to
nation.
end it up with.
Was broadcasting.
But first of all, make up your mind.
Again, radio was already there. It's how we use it that made a difference.
When you love her by the radio phone.
Okay, Patsy. I'm back in the saddle, bird on travel, and happy in the saddle again. I'm searching on the street, still they're always trusting, I'm happy in the saddle again. I'm speaking for America's #1 singing cowgirl, Patsy Montana. We're saying so long, everybody. Good luck to your friends, and above all, we do wish you good health.
Now stay tuned for Just Plain Bill.
Keep on the sunny side, always on the sunny side. Keep on the sunny side of life.
I think that the world, the America that radio leaped into and fascinated was really a quieter life than what we know.
WLAG, Minneapolis.
My first recollection of radio is sitting on my...
Yeah. Imagine before this, everyone's sitting in the dark. There is no sound and at night. And then you hear the voices.
uncle's lap and putting my head up next to his, and he had his arm around me, and the headphones went across both of our heads. I remember having a piece in my ear and putting my head next to his and hearing bands play from far away, dance music that was not allowed in our family.
Dance music that wasn't allowed in his family. Black music. Music from far away. Cultures from far away. Garrison Keillor's in rural Minnesota, and he's hearing New Orleans. That just blows your mind. Anyway, so radio becomes big. It takes off quickly.
It went on the air in 1920, reporting the victory of Warren G. Harding and Calvin.
Yep, first radio station KDKA in Pittsburgh.
Coolidge over James M. Cox and a young Franklin D. Roosevelt.
100 years
time,
ago.
Harding has collected more than 16 million
First
votes.
radio
against some
broadcast.
9
First
million
radio
for the
station.
Democrats. We'll give you the state vote in just a moment. But first, we'd like to ask you to let us know if this broadcast is reaching you.
Please drop at the car. Address station KDKA, Westinghouse, East Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
But it was not long before everyone seemed to be going into broadcasting.
This is station WCAP, Washington.
Universities, newspapers, banks, department stores.
WJAR, Providence. WNAC, Boston.
In Davenport, Iowa, the Palmer School of Chiropractic had a station. So did the John Fink Jewelry Company of Fort Smith, Arkansas. And in Milford, Kansas, over station KFKB, Kansas Folks Know Best, Dr. John Romulus Brinkley lectured 3 times a day on the aphrodisiac powers of implanted goat glands.
So you have all this stuff going on. Everybody's setting these things up. They all have, and each station has its own band, its own announcers.
5 boxing matches, 67 church services, 7 football games, 10 harmonica solos, 74 organ concerts, 40 plays, 723 talks and lectures, and 205 bedtime stories. Radio ate up material faster than it could be produced. One desperate announcer just stuck his microphone out the studio window and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, we bring you the sounds of New York City." Listeners loved it.
One thing, there was this constant companion in the house. If you were alone, you could turn the radio on and there would always be something to listen to.
Yeah, the world really
All you had to do
changed.
was open those cabinet doors and turn that dial, and there you were. You could be in New York or Chicago listening to some wonderful music, perhaps. One thing, I probably gave up practicing the piano because I didn't have to make my own music anymore.
Of the Memphis is now lined up.
In 1926, David Sarnoff helped forge the first radio network. He called it the National Broadcasting Company, NBC.
Awaiting Lindbergh. Lindbergh is coming.
NBC, a broadcast network was a lot cheaper. You didn't have to put in your own band or your own announcers. You pay Sarnoff a fee and he gives you the programming. Brilliant idea.
Down as the gangplank.
In June of 1927, when Charles Lindbergh returned to America after his historic...
So it's really taken off. You have this new thing, and meanwhile, these guys are fighting the patent wars in court. And we don't have to go into all the patent stuff.
Delivered.
As the storm...
Anyway, and you see, you have your own announcers. It was a whole different world.
Anything goes.
See, we have people from
Good
different
evening,
backgrounds.
ladies and gentlemen of the radio audience.
Well, howdy there, folks.
We have all the programming that we have now. You have Westerns and quiz shows and all of that. Let's see what that was. Anyway, so it really takes
Or
off.
AM. AM could not broadcast the full range of sounds.
Okay, it was all AM radio. Armstrong comes up with something that works better. FM. The problem was with FM, Sarnoff had this other invention he was working on. He didn't want to retool all his radio stations. That new invention was television. He didn't want to bother with FM radio. Armstrong knew he had the thing, but no one cared. And here's television begins.
Made an announcement that would change broadcasting forever.
So important
It was television.
There you go.
For a decade, David Sarnoff had directed a team of engineers working.
We'll come back to television, but he wasn't interested in FM. So what he did was he bought the patent from Armstrong and tried to shut him down. He kept Armstrong from making FM radio work.
Result of his inability to compromise.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special news bulletin.
And here's World War II. Nothing much new happened in broadcasting during World War II because everybody was busy with more important things. DeForest is all right.
Great patriot. World War II really proved that more than World War I by the simple fact that he immediately, and he wasn't asked to do this, he did this on his own very quickly, turned all his patents over to the U.S. government.
Yep, he didn't make a damn dollar off of it. He helped make radar. He helped make communications
Called
work.
General Sarnoff.
Yeah, he volunteered. He helped.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
The world will note that the first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, a military base.
Okay. After the war, he's trying to get FM off the ground. Nobody's
Later years.
interested.
And of course, we will never know.
Presenting the big change in television styling.
Because we have television. And nobody wants to listen to Howard Armstrong.
Radio at its finest over frequency modulation.
But Howard Armstrong was still stubbornly determined to stick with FM. Meanwhile, the Federal Communications Commission had declared that all sound for television would be carried over FM, which meant millions in royalties for Armstrong. But RCA refused to pay royalties, encouraged other manufacturers not to pay them either, and developed circuits which it claimed were different. And in an attempt to put Armstrong out of business once and for all, Sarnoff successfully lobbied the FCC to change FM's frequency, making obsolete every one of the radios Armstrong had licensed. Armstrong fought back as best he could, launching a series of suits against RCA and other giant corporate.
Yep, didn't work.
Royalty income dwindled. His patents were expiring. His health deteriorated. But he could not help himself.
It's a kind of an irony that those qualities that resulted in his great accomplishments in radio, the ability to go through a brick wall on radio theory, were the very qualities.
Yep, Armstrong
Spent another $1 million fighting his case.
would not.
His attorney
compromise.
predicted that he would win in the end, but it would take another 9 years. That Thanksgiving, all the intensity and frustration of Armstrong's obsessive battle with RCA suddenly exploded in a great rage upon his wife. Armstrong swung with a fire poker. The blow landed on Marion's right arm. In a panic, she fled. Their marriage was over.
Armstrong kept driving himself.
And what happened to Armstrong? Here it goes.
He had been a man of enormous drive, tension, and he had driven himself to the breaking point that finally snapped.
Sunday, January 31st, 1954, marked the 40th anniversary of Howard Armstrong's demonstration of his first great invention, the regenerative circuit, to the chief inspector of the old Marconi Company, David Sarnoff. In other years, they had marked the anniversary of their friendship with a telegram or letter. Fix your gaze and energies on the next 20 years, Sarnoff had told Armstrong on the 20th anniversary in 1934, so that the telegrams and letters they would exchange at the end of the next generation would make them feel still young, even then. The 20 years had passed. They were enemies now, and Armstrong had been defeated. In his bedroom that evening, he wrote a letter to Marion, filled with regret for the way their lives had turned out. God keep you, he added at the end, and may the Lord have mercy on my soul. Edwin Howard Armstrong had always loved high places. The 125-foot tower behind his house in Yonkers, the New Jersey Palisades he climbed as a youth, the WJZ Tower, with its great strap iron ball 400 feet above 42nd Street, and his own FM tower across the Hudson in New Jersey. Now he removed the air conditioner from his bedroom window. He put on his hat, scarf, overcoat, and gloves, opened the window, and stepped out, 13 stories above the street.
Yep, killed himself. The only honest one in this whole bunch, and he couldn't do it. That, I think, is a greater lesson than any technology. You have the huckster and self-promoter who came up with some interesting ideas. You got the honest man who just couldn't handle it. And then you have the brilliant businessman who gave us the new world. You know, this is not just about technology, it's about people. And, you know, think about that as we go forward. So we'll flesh out the more factual stuff next time. But anyway, any other, that's where I end this one. Any questions on any of the assignments or anything else going on? Thank you, those of us who stayed with me. I appreciate it. Stuff to think about. And we'll talk about radio history and into television next week. Have a lovely weekend, and I'll look at the essays. Any other questions?
Bye, Dr. Z.
All right, have a good night.